It's already week 5 of the fantasy football season. Can you believe it? If you're getting ready for a playoff push or trying to keep your season alive, we have everything you need to know to get you ready for week 5. This is the Radio.com Sports Fantasy Football Show. What's up, everybody? I'm Steven Andress. Every week on the show, we tell you waiver wire pickup, streaming options, and some stealthy starts, but we always start with Pick 'em Up, our weekly waiver wire segment. These are players owned in fewer than 50% of leagues that you can go out and pick up in your league right now. And our top waiver wire pickup for week number 5 is Tampa Bay running back Ronald Jones, a guy that a lot of us had skepticism about entering this season, but he looks bona fide at this point at New Orleans in week 5. In week 4, 20 touches for 82 yards and a touchdown. Week 3, 15 touches for 121 yards. And look at his snap counts the past 2 weeks. Went from 30% of snaps in week 3 to 49% of snaps in week 4. That corresponded with Peyton Barber's snaps going down from 36 to 26%. It is clear that Ronald Jones has the trust of new head coach Bruce Arians, and he is a guy that could become a weekly RB2 option for you moving forward. Go out and make Ronald Jones your top priority if available in your league. The next running back option on waivers I'd go after is Darell Williams. And we mentioned him last week, but it's worth mentioning again because he's still owned in fewer than 50% of leagues. The Kansas City Chiefs running back, when given the opportunity over the past 2 weeks, has done well with it. Darell Williams last week against the Detroit Lions, 11 touches for 56 yards and 2 touchdowns. In week 3, 14 touches for 109 yards. We still don't know the status of Damian Williams moving forward. Darell is the clear handcuff if Damian Williams is to miss more time or if LaShawn McCoy were to get banged up again. And Darell Williams has the upside to take Damian Williams' job outright this week against the Indianapolis Colts and moving forward this season. The top waiver wire options at wide receiver are less than stellar in week 5, but there's one name out there that I think should be rostered in 100% of PPR leagues. It's Buffalo wide receiver Cole Beasley. And I know, it's a boring name. It doesn't excite you. But look at the production through the first 4 weeks. He has 9+ targets in 3 of 4 weeks. Last week, 7 catches for 75 yards on 13 targets. Week 3, 8 catches for 43 yards on 10 targets. In PPR leagues, he has 9+ PPR points in every single week this season. Josh Allen is looking his way often as his safety valve, and I think Cole Beasley keeps that trend moving in the right direction at Tennessee in week number 5. And one more friendly reminder, Giants wide receiver Golden Tate comes off suspension this week. He's worth rostering in leagues where you're needy at wide receiver for week number 5, especially with Daniel Jones now at quarterback over Eli Manning. Moving on to the stream team, and these are options among quarterbacks, tight ends, and defenses owned in fewer than 50% of leagues that you can not only pick up, but start in week number 5 based on their matchup. And the first quarterback is Jameis Winston of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at New Orleans this week. And this is less of a streaming option and more so a season-long option because he's on fire with Bruce Arians. Week 3, 380 yards and 3 touchdowns, 25.5 fantasy points. Week 4 against the Rams, 385 yards, 4 touchdowns, 29.3 fantasy points. He should be rostered in 100% of leagues for the rest of the season. The second streaming option for week 5 is Colts quarterback Jacoby Brissett, who continues to impress. He's doing it quietly, but we just care about points in fantasy football, and Brissett is providing that and gets another good matchup on the road against Kansas City in week 5. Look what Brissett has done this season as a fantasy quarterback. Back-to-back 20-point weeks. He has 16+ points every single week this year. He's been consistent, 10 touchdowns to just 2 interceptions in 2019, and the Chiefs have allowed the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season at more than 19 per game. Let's move on to streaming tight ends owned in fewer than 50% of leagues. And this week, just like any week this year, stream whoever is facing the Arizona Cardinals. This week, it's the Cincinnati Bengals. Why do we say that? Look what the Cardinals are allowing to fantasy tight ends this season. Arizona, 27.8 fantasy points per game allowed to tight ends. The next closest team is the Bucs, allowing 19.6 fantasy points per game. It's ridiculous how many points the Cardinals are allowing to opposing tight ends this season. That means the Bengals tight ends are viable streaming options this week. The next option is not a guy you can start this week, but he should be rostered in 100% of leagues. It's Jets tight end Chris Herndon. The final week of his suspension is week 5. It was a 4-game suspension, but the Jets had a bye week 4. So he comes back week 6. Get him a week early and be happy. From week 6 on last year, he was a top 10 tight end in fantasy football when he took over as starter. So again, grab him a week early before the rest of your league is going to the waiver wire to pick him up in week number 6. Moving on to streaming defenses owned in fewer than 50% of leagues. And let's check, who are the New York Jets playing this week? Oh, they're playing the Philadelphia Eagles. Let's pick up that defense because Luke Falk is still at quarterback and the Jets are terrible. The Eagles defense hasn't been that good, but we don't care about that with streaming defenses. We care solely about the matchup, and the Jets offense has allowed the second most points to fantasy defenses this year at 12.3 fantasy points per game. Again, Sam Darnold still out with the high school disease mono. Falk at quarterback, who had just 4.5 yards per attempt and an interception against the Patriots. That offense is miserable right now, and the Eagles should be fine at home in that matchup. The second streaming fantasy defense is the Tennessee Titans, who I can't figure out if the Titans are a good team or a bad team, but this defense has impressed. Look at the numbers. The Titans this week against Buffalo, and it's a Titans defense that has allowed 13, 19, 20, and 10 points to opposing offenses this season. That's pretty impressive. 3 games of less than 21 points per game. 3+ sacks for the Titans defense in 3 of 4 games this year. A turnover in 3 of 4 games this year. And Buffalo has allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to defenses this year at a clip of 12+ fantasy points per game. The Titans defense is a viable option. Before we close up shop for week 5, let's look at stealthy starts. These are players that you typically would not feel comfortable starting, but because of the matchup, you can make as a flex option this week. And the first is Sony Michel, the Patriots running back, who has been probably the biggest headache of any fantasy running back this year because he is so touchdown dependent. He gives you nothing in the passing game. He has been below average, to say the least, rushing the ball this year, but he gets to face the Washington Redskins. Yes, the Patriots face the Redskins in week 5. Say a prayer for Washington. Back to Sony Michel, 15+ rushes in 3 of 4 games this year, but he hasn't done much, less than 4 yards per carry in every game. But even though he's touchdown dependent, I still think he finds the end zone in what is going to be a blowout against Washington. Because of that, I do think he's a viable flex option in week number 5. Our second stealthy start is a guy you've been starting all season, but maybe you're going to be uncomfortable now starting him in week 5. Chargers running back Austin Ekeler, and obviously this has to do with the return of Melvin Gordon. I still think even with Gordon back in week 5, you start Ekeler with confidence because of how banged up the Chargers offense is. Tight end Hunter Henry is out. Wide receiver Mike Williams missed week 4. Ekeler has 5+ receptions in every game this year. They get to take on the Denver Broncos, who have allowed the 7th most fantasy points to running backs this season at 29 per game. Start him even with Melvin Gordon back. I still think Ekeler plays at least half of snaps in week number 5. And our last stealthy start for week 5 is Denver wide receiver Emmanuel Sanders. This guy was started in less than 25% of leagues last week. I don't understand why people are hesitating to put Manny Sanders in their lineups. The guy's an absolute stud. He was a top 10 fantasy receiver before he got hurt last year. It's time to start playing him. He has 86+ yards and or a touchdown in 3 of 4 games this year. That includes games against the Jags and the Bears defenses. This guy is really good. What he's done to come back from a torn Achilles at 32 years old is not only incredible, it's unprecedented. And the Broncos will continue to play from behind. That counts this week against the Chargers as well. and that means more passing volume, more potential targets when the Broncos are playing from behind for Emmanuel Sanders. He's healthy. Play him. Simple as that. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode of the Radio.com Sports Fantasy Football Show. As always, if you have any fantasy questions, feel free to comment below, like and subscribe as well, and I'd be happy to answer your fantasy lineup or trade questions for week number 5. I'm Steven Andress, and we'll see you next week here on the Radio.com Sports Fantasy Football Show.